The radio crackled to life at 4:38 a.m., jolting me from the light doze I'd fallen into. 3 hours into my morning patrol at the Namib Wildlife Conservancy, and the eastern sky was just beginning to lighten with the promise of another scorching day. "Abe, you there?" The voice belonged to Kibo, one of our trackers. "We've got reports of a cheetah cub separated from its mother. Eastern sector near the dried riverbed." My heart skipped. Cheetah populations had been declining steadily for years. Every cub was precious, a fragile link in the survival chain of the species. "On my way," I replied, already turning the Land Rover toward the coordinates he'd given. The tires kicked up dust as I navigated the rough terrain, my mind racing. A lone cub wouldn't survive long. Not with the lions, hyenas, and jackals that roamed these parts, not to mention the unforgiving heat that would soon blanket the savanna. The sun was half risen when I spotted him. A tiny speck of gold and black huddled beneath a thorn acacia. Even from a distance, I could see something was wrong. The cub wasn't moving with the fluid grace typical of cheetahs. Instead, it was hunched, one front leg held awkwardly off the ground. I killed the engine and reached for my binoculars. My breath caught in my throat. The cub was thin, too thin. Its spotted coat, normally sleek and vibrant, appeared dull and matted. The right front leg was clearly injured, possibly broken. "Hold on, little one," I whispered, reaching for my radio to call for backup. But as the words left my mouth, the cub's head snapped up. Our eyes met across the distance, and I felt something electric pass between us. Fear, yes, but something else too, a desperate will to survive. Then it happened. The cub tried to stand, collapsed, and let out a sound that will haunt me for the rest of my days. A high, keening wail that seemed to contain all the loneliness and pain in the world. I made a decision then that went against all our protocols. I couldn't wait for backup. Approaching an injured wild animal, even a cub, is dangerous. They don't understand you're trying to help. They only know fear and pain, and they'll fight with everything they have. I moved slowly, deliberately, keeping my body low and non-threatening. 20 meters, 15, 10. The cub watched me, eyes wide golden orbs in its small face. Its sides heaved with rapid breaths. "It's okay," I murmured, though I knew it wasn't the words, but the tone that mattered. "I'm not going to hurt you." At 5 meters, the cub tried to scramble away, but its injured leg gave out. It tumbled with a yelp that pierced my heart. When it tried to rise again, I saw the full extent of the damage. The leg was definitely broken, and there was a deep gash along its side, crusted with dried blood and dirt. I froze, allowing the cub to settle. It watched me with those impossibly large eyes, and I saw its dilemma reflected there. The instinct to flee warring with the inability to do so. "I know you're scared," I said, keeping my voice low and even. "But I'm your only chance." The cub didn't move as I inched closer. 3 meters, 2. Close enough to see the rise and fall of its ribcage, to count the spots on its trembling body. Then, as if accepting its fate, it laid its head down on the dusty ground. The surrender in that gesture brought tears to my eyes. I had tranquilizers in my kit, but the cub was so small, so malnourished, that I feared even the lowest dose might be too much. Instead, I opted for a capture hood, a soft, dark cloth that would cover its eyes and help calm it. With movements as gentle as I could manage, I draped the hood over the cub's head. It flinched but didn't struggle. Carefully, I slid my hands under its body, feeling the alarming lightness, the fragile bones so close to the surface of its skin. As I lifted it, the cub let out a soft whimper that seemed to reverberate through my own body. I cradled it against my chest, feeling its heart racing against my palm. "I've got you," I whispered. "I've got you now." The drive back to the conservation center was tense. The cub lay in a carrier on the seat beside me, the hood still covering its eyes. Every bump in the road made me wince, imagining the pain jolting through its broken leg. I radioed ahead, and by the time I arrived, Dr. Nala was waiting. One of the best wildlife veterinarians in the country, she took one look at the cub and her face grew serious. "Malnutrition, dehydration, broken radius, and what looks like a jackal bite on the flank," she said, her hands already moving with practiced efficiency. "He's been alone for at least 3 days, maybe more. Will he make it?" The question caught in my throat. Nala didn't answer immediately. her focus on inserting an IV line into the cub's thin leg. "The next 24 hours will tell," she finally said. "He's young, maybe 12 weeks, should still be with his mother." She paused. "Did you see any sign of her?" I shook my head. "Nothing. Kibo's team is out there now, searching." She nodded, her expression grave. We both knew what that likely meant. Cheetah mothers don't abandon their cubs willingly. "He needs a name," Nala said as she began cleaning the wound on the cub's flank. "For the records." I looked down at the small face, still mostly hidden by the hood. Only the chin was visible, with its distinctive pattern of spots that was unique as a fingerprint. "Kibwe?" I said softly. It means blessed in Swahili. The next day passed in a blur of worry and hope. Kibwe was kept sedated while Nala set his broken leg and treated the infection that had started to spread from the jackal bite. I couldn't leave. Couldn't make myself walk away from the small isolation room where he lay on a heated pad, his tiny body connected to tubes and monitors. Word spread quickly through the conservation center. Staff members stopped by throughout the day, peering through the glass window at our newest patient. Kibo's team returned late in the afternoon with grim news. They'd found the mother's body about 2 kilometers from where I'd discovered Kibwe. Poachers. A wire snare around her neck. I sat beside Kibwe's enclosure that night, watching the rise and fall of his chest. There was something about him, something that had grabbed hold of my heart the moment our eyes met across the savannah. I'd helped rescue dozens of animals over the years, but this felt different, more personal somehow. Perhaps it was the way he'd looked at me with such clear desperation. Or maybe it was the awful sound of his cry, so full of loneliness. Whatever it was, I knew I was committed now, to his survival, to his future. On the 3rd day, Nala reduced the sedation. "Time to see what we're dealing with," she said, her tone cautiously optimistic. "His vitals have stabilized and he's responding well to the antibiotics." We waited together as the drugs wore off. First came the twitching of his paws, then the rapid movement of his eyes beneath closed lids. Finally, those eyes opened. Still the incredible gold I remembered, but clearer now, more focused. Kibwe blinked, taking in his surroundings. His gaze landed on me, and I held my breath, waiting for the fear, the panic. Instead, he made a small, chirping sound, almost like a question. "Hey there," I said softly, kneeling beside his enclosure. "Welcome back." His eyes stayed on mine, and I saw recognition there. Not of me as a person, but perhaps of me as the one who had carried him to safety. "He's going to need round-the-clock care," Nala said, checking his IV. "The leg will heal, but he's severely malnourished, and without his mother to teach him..." She left the sentence unfinished. I understood what she wasn't saying. Cheetahs aren't born knowing how to hunt. They learn from their mothers. Without those lessons, Kibwe would never survive in the wild. "I'll do it," I said, the words coming out before I'd fully thought them through. "I'll take care of him." The weeks that followed were among the most challenging and rewarding of my life. Kibwe lived in a special enclosure in my quarters where I could monitor him constantly. At first, he was hesitant, skittish. He'd growl when I approached, his tiny body tense with fear. But slowly, as I hand-fed him specially prepared meals, as I cleaned his wounds and changed his bandages, as I sat beside him through the night when fever gripped him, something changed. The fear in his eyes was replaced by curiosity, then by something I hesitated to name but felt like trust. The first time he purred, a vibrating rumble that I felt through my fingertips as I stroked his head. I cried. Not the quiet tears of before, but deep, racking sobs that came from somewhere ancient within me. Kibwe watched me with those solemn golden eyes, and then, to my astonishment, he hobbled over on his 3 good legs and pressed his small body against mine, as if he were comforting me. Kibwe's recovery was slow but steady. The day his cast came off, he took his first tentative steps on the healed leg. He was cautious at first, testing the limb, but soon he was racing around my quarters with a kitten's boundless energy. It was both heartwarming and heartbreaking to watch. Heartwarming because of how far he'd come from that wounded, dying cub I'd found. Heartbreaking because I knew what was coming next. "He's ready for the rehabilitation enclosure," Nala said one morning, 6 weeks after the rescue. "We need to start preparing him for eventual release." I nodded, though the thought made my chest ache. The rehabilitation enclosure was the first step toward returning animals to the wild. It was what we worked for, what we hoped for. It was also the beginning of the end of my time with Kibwe. The day I moved him to the larger enclosure, I felt like I was saying goodbye to a part of myself. The space was designed to mimic the savanna, with natural vegetation, rocks for climbing, and even a small watering hole. Most importantly, it had areas where Kibwe could practice hunting, chasing mechanical prey that would help develop his skills. I set the carrier down in the middle of the enclosure and opened the door. Kibwe hesitated, his nose twitching as he took in the new scents. Then, with a fluid grace that made my breath catch, he emerged and took his first steps into his new home. He moved cautiously at first, exploring the perimeter, his tail swishing with excitement. Then he found a patch of sunlight and stretched out in it, his spotted coat gleaming. He looked, for the first time since I'd found him, like a true cheetah. Wild. Free. I watched him for a long time, memorizing the pattern of his spots, the way his ears swiveled to catch every sound, the gentle rise and fall of his sides as he breathed. Then, before my resolve could break, I turned and walked away. The months that followed were a lesson in letting go. I still visited Kibwe daily, but I maintained a professional distance. He needed to learn independence, to develop the wariness of humans that would keep him safe in the wild. It was hard, harder than I'd expected, to watch him grow without being able to reach out and touch him, to feel his purr beneath my hand. But there was a different kind of joy in seeing him develop into a strong, healthy adolescent cheetah. In watching him master the hunting simulations, his body a blur of speed and precision. And if sometimes, when I stood at the observation platform, he would pause in his play and stare up at me with those golden eyes, if my heart would skip a beat at the connection I still felt, well, that was my secret to keep. The day of Kibwe's release was clear and cool, with a gentle breeze rustling the acacia trees. We'd chosen a location within the protected area of the Conservancy, far from human settlements, but rich in prey animals. As we drove to the release site, Kibwe quiet in his carrier beside me, I tried to prepare myself for the final goodbye. I'd done this before with other animals. It was the goal of our work, the best possible outcome. But it had never felt like this, like I was losing something irreplaceable. We arrived as the sun was climbing in the sky, casting long shadows across the savanna. I parked the vehicle and sat for a moment, gathering my courage. "Ready?" Nala asked softly from the passenger seat. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Together, we carried the carrier to a small rise overlooking the plain. In the distance, a herd of impala grazed, unaware of the predator about to join their world. "Remember the protocol," Nala said, her voice gentle but firm. "No eye contact, no talking to him. Clean break." I nodded again, swallowing hard. We set the carrier down and stepped back. Nala gave me a nod, and I reached forward to undo the latch. The door swung open. Nothing happened for a long moment. Then, slowly, Kibwe emerged. He stood completely still, his ears swiveling, taking in the sights and sounds and smells of the open savanna. His muscles tensed, and I could see the wild energy building in him, the recognition of his natural habitat. He took one step forward, then another. His head lifted, and he drew in a deep breath of the savanna air. And then, without warning, he turned. His golden eyes found mine, and in them, I saw something that made my heart stop. Recognition. Gratitude. A connection that transcended the boundaries between human and wild. For a heartbeat, we looked at each other, communicating in a language without words. Then Kibwe made a small sound, not quite a chirp, not quite a purr. A sound I'd never heard before and somehow knew I'd never hear again. He turned back to the savanna, and with a grace that brought tears to my eyes, he began to run. His body stretched out in that distinctive cheetah stride, his heeled legs strong and sure beneath him. He ran as if he'd never been injured, never been close to death, never known captivity. He ran as if he'd been born to run, which, of course, he had. I watched until he was just a speck in the distance, merging with the golden grass and dappled shade. Then I watched a while longer until I couldn't see him at all. "Goodbye, Kibwe," I whispered. "Be safe, be wild, Be free. The savannah seemed to absorb my words, the wind carrying them away into the endless blue sky. And though my heart ached with the loss, it was also full of the privilege of having been part of this remarkable creature's journey, of having made a difference, however small, in the fate of a species. As we drove back to the center, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. Kibwe was where he belonged now, and I was where I belonged, doing the work I was meant to do. And somewhere out there, beneath the vast African sky, a young cheetah,